We're on Daf Chaf Hey, and yesterday we finished the Mishnah, which begins on Chav Daled Amud Beis, and the Mishnah records a machlokas between the Chachamim and Rabbi Tarfon regarding the case of Keren B'Chatzar Nizak. And if you recall, Rabbi Tarfon had a Kal V'chomer which he used to derive the halacha that Keren in the Chatzar Nizak pays Nezek Sholem. And the halacha of Tammuz for Chatzi Nezek only applies in Rishus HaRabim. And the Rabbanon responded to his Kal V'chomer by claiming Dayo Levam and Adin Lios Kinodun. And since you're basing yourself on the fact that Keren is more chomur than Shein V'Regel in Rishus HaRabim, Shein V'Regel is Potem Rishus HaRabim, and Keren is Chayav Rishus HaRabim, and therefore you want to say that Keren should have the same din of Shein V'Regel in Rishus HaNizak and pay Nezek Sholem, but you're basing yourself on Keren Rishus HaRabim, which is only a Chatzi Nezek and Dayal Levam and Adin. You can't derive more than the Melamed could teach you. In other words, you're limited and restricted by the confines of the Melamed. If the Melamed is Keren B'Rishus HaRabim, then you're limited to Chatzi Nezek, and you can't derive Nezek Sholem from Chatzi Nezek. So the Gemara asks Rabbi Tarfon, Lesle Dayo, V'Hadayo Midoraisahu. How could it be that Rabbi Tarfon would deny the principle of Dayo when Dayo itself is in the Torah? And Rabbi Tarfon can't argue against the Torah. This Sanya we learned in the Brisa. Midin Kal V'chomer Ketzad. How do we derive something from a Kal V'chomer? Now, the premise of Kal V'chomer before Dayo is that the Chomer should be twice the Kal. You double it. And therefore, the Brisa analyzing the parsha in Ba'aloscha and Bamidbar Yud Beis with regard to the Lashon Hara of Miriam against Moshe because of the Isha Kushis and so forth and so on. So the pasuk says, "Vayomer Hashem el Moshe v'Avia Yorok Yorak b'Fanea." If, let's say, a daughter would insult her father, then the Nazifa, and I don't know exactly how to translate the word Nazifa into English, if you have an English translation for Nazifa, but what it means is that the father shuns his daughter, sort of excludes her because she insulted him. And the Torah says that Ticholem Shivas Yomim, meaning that the period of time for this Nazifa it will extend for 7 days. And during the 7 days period, she's, as we said before, rejected, and she's shown these panim zophos, these angry faces of the father. What happens if she insults the father with a capital F of fathers, meaning the Father in heaven? Kal v'chomer, how much more so should there be a Nazifa if she insults the Shechina? The Shechina should be nozef in a person who insulted the Shechina. And that should be Arba Asar Yom. We should multiply 7 times 2 because you have the Kal in the case of an insult to a human being, a father in this case, and that was 7 days of Nazifa. In a case of insulting the Ribono Shalom, the Shechina, that should double and it should be Arba Asar. And therefore, the pasuk is intimating that Hashem is telling Moshe that his sister Miriam should really deserve 14 days of Nazifa. That means Hezger. She should be excluded from Machne Yisrael for 14 days. Ella, however, Lamaisa, we know that that's not so, and that this Hezger of Miriam was only 7 days. And the answer is Dayal V'Amen Adin Lios Kinodun. This is going to teach us that since the Nazifa of her father is the basis for the Kal V'chomer. And therefore the Kal V'chomer teaching me Nazifa from Shechina could not go beyond the Nazifa of the Kal, in that case, Avir, which would mean that the Dayo is going to restrict it. And instead of being 14 days of Nazifa in the case of Miriam, it's going to only be 7 days of Nazifa because it's derived from the Nazifa of a father, which the Torah says is 7 days. So therefore, we swing back to Akash on Rabbi Tarfon. How can Rabbi Tarfon tell us that Keren B'Shus HaNizak pays Nezek Sholem? And we derive this with a Kal V'chomer from Keren B'Shus HaRabim, which is only Chayav Chatzi Nezek, since Keren B'Shus HaRabim is the Melamed, and Keren B'Shus HaNizak is the Nilmad. The Nilmad cannot exceed beyond the bounds of the Melamed. And if the Melamed is Keren B'Shus HaRabim, which is only Chayav Chatzi Nezek, then the Nilmad of Keren B'Shus HaNizak would have to be capped at Chatzi Nezek. And now the Gemara gives a breakthrough distinction here to explain the Shita of Rabbi Tarfon. Took a while for that sneeze to come. Let's pay attention to the following. In the case of Miriam, if we apply Dayo, the Kal V'chomer will still teach me 7 days. Notice the Kal V'chomer should have taught me 14 days. We clip it, shall I say, with Dayo, and it's only 7 days. But the Kal V'chomer is still meaningful. The application of Dayo has not completely undermined the Kal V'chomer. And therefore, the Gemara postulates that Ki Lesle Dayo, when does Rabbi Tarfon check Dayo? And forget about Dayo. Dayo doesn't exist. The Kal V'chomer is a free agent, and it's not bound and restricted by the Dayo principle. Heicha de mafrich Kal V'chomer. If by applying Dayo, you will completely undermine the Kal V'chomer now becomes mufrach. There's no substance whatsoever to the Kal V'chomer. Then Rabbi Tarfon waives the law of Dayo. But heicha de lo mafrich Kal V'chomer, if by applying Dayo, we still are left with the equation between the Melamed and the Nilmad, and we still derive something from the Kal V'chomer. It's not a null set, but rather it has substance to it, then it's like Dayo. Then we'll apply Dayo. And now the Gemara is going to apply this to the case of Miriam. Hassam, in the case of the mice of Miriam, Shiva, there was 7 days of Archaka, because of the Nazifa, the Shechina lo ksivi. Nowhere does it say that the Nazifa of Shechina should be 7 days. But rather, we're going to derive a Kal V'chomer from Nazifa the father, and Asa Kal V'chomer v'yaise arbasa. And now the Kal V'chomer is going to teach me that we double it because of the Chumrah of Nazifa Shechina, and therefore it becomes 14. V'asa Dayo. Now Dayo comes to play. The apik shiva for uki al shiva. And now the Dayo principle is going to say that we'll use the Kal V'chomer to derive shivas yom of hezger. So the Kal V'chomer still has some substance to it, even after we apply Dayo al hacha. But in the case of Keren b'chatz HaNizak, is chatzi nezek siv. The Torah already says that Keren b'Shus HaRabim pays Chatzi Nezek, and therefore, for sure, in the Chatz HaNizak, you have to pay Chatzi Nezek. V'asa Kal V'chomer, the whole thrust and the purpose of the Kal V'chomer is v'aisi Chatzi Nezek Achrina, to add another Chatzi Nezek on top, in order to equal Nezek Shalem. V'darashta Dayo, if you apply the principle of Dayo, then Efrach le Kal V'chomer. The Kal V'chomer is left as a null set. There's nothing the Kal V'chomer could teach me. You've completely destroyed and uprooted the Kal V'chomer, because even without the Kal V'chomer, we knew for sure that Keren b'Shus HaNizak is Chayev Chatzi Nezek. And therefore, the whole purpose of the Kal V'chomer, it only begins from Chatzi Nezek up to Nezek Shalem. That's where the Kal V'chomer is. And if you're going to apply Dayo, then the Kal V'chomer is not. It's completely gone. And here's where Rabbi Tarfon suspends the principle of Dayo. But in the case of Miriam, as the Torah prescribes it, there is Dayo. And that's because the Kal V'chomer, in Yiddish we would say, bleibt etwas. Are you familiar with that? Bleiben etwas. There's something left in the Kal V'chomer, even after Dayo. Then we apply Dayo. Correct the Gemara for Rabbanon. The Rabbanon who hold Dayo, even in a case where the Kal V'chomer is going to now go down the tubes. Why didn't the Rabbanon accept the distinction of Rabbi Tarfon between the Dayo of Hezker Miriam, where we have something left to the Kal V'chomer, even after Dayo, as opposed to Keren B'Chotzer Nizak, where as a result of the Pircha, the Kal V'chomer is completely uprooted? And the Gemara answers the reason why the Rabbanan didn't make that distinction is because Shiva Deshchina Ksivit. Even the 7 days of Hezger for insulting the Shechina, which is called the Zifa of 7 days of Shechina, Ksuve, it's written in the Torah itself. So we would know it even without the Kal V'chomer. So the Kal V'chomer only begins from day 7 till day 14. Because the Pasuk says, Tisoger Shivas Yomim Michutz Lamachne. So the 7 days of Hezger was a given. The Kal V'chomer is coming to jack it up from 7 to 14. And yet we're going to apply Dayo and we're going to clamp it down at 7 and not expand it to 14. And therefore the Dayo principle is teaching us that Miriam will have Hezger no more than 7 days. Which means that the Dayo principle just blows up the Kal V'chomer, completely uproots and trumps the Kal V'chomer, making it into a null set. Because again, we had the 7 days of Hezger for Miriam even before the Kal V'chomer. Kal V'chomer was meant to jack us up from 7 to 14. Now you're applying Dayo, and it completely undermines the Kal V'chomer. The Kal V'chomer is a null set, and yet the Rabbanan still apply the principle of Dayo against Rabbi Tarfon. And therefore, with regard to Keren B'Shus HaNizak, we're not going to derive a Kal V'chomer from Keren B'Shus HaRabim, because Keren B'Shus HaRabim caps it off at Chatzi Nezek, and you can't use a Kal V'chomer to establish more than the Malamed, meaning you're boxed into the 7 days. And that's Dayo L'Vom and Adin, Lios Kenod, and here's where the Chacham reject Rabbi Tarfon. Frekti Gemara of Rabbi Tarfon, who made this distinction between 2 categories of Dayo. And with regard to the Hezger of Miriam, Rabbi Tarfon holds that this was not a pircha which renders the Kal V'chomer completely meaningless. And the answer is because Hahu Tisager, because the pasuk says Tisager Shivas Yam Chutz L'Machne. It's not going to teach me a chiyuv hezger when there's an azif of shechina of 7 days, but rather darshinon dayohu. The whole purpose of the pasuk Tisager Shivas Yamim is to teach me the principle of dayo. But again, Dayo, because we're still left with the Kal V'chomer. And Dayo is going to tell me that the Nazifa will be up to, not beyond, not greater than 7 days. And we would have said, if not for the Dayo, that is 14 days. Frek the Gemara for Rabbanan, who darshan the pasuk Tisager Shivas Yamim, to teach me that there's a hezger of Shivas Yam Mishum Nezifas Hashchina. So where do they derive the klal of Dayo? Gemara answers Ksiv Kroachrina. The Rabbanan derived the law of Dayo from a different pasuk. Shenemar v'tisagir Miriam michutz lamachne shivas yomim. The Torah is teaching me that Miriam's hezger was shivas yomim, not 14 days, to teach me that Dayo lefam and I did lios kinod. Rabbi Tarfon, why is it, ask the Gemara, that Rabbi Tarfon doesn't need this drasha of the klal of Dayo? And the answer is, right, again, since he derives from the pasuk Tisager Shivas Yom Chutz Machne, what is the purpose of this pasuk? And the Gemara answers, "Hahu dafilu bi alma darshin and Dayo." The pasuk of Atisager Miriam Yichutz Lamach, the Shivas Yomim, is coming to teach me that even in other drashos of Kal Vachomer elsewhere in the Torah, Darshinan. And what does that mean, Darshina? We say Dayo lefam and adin lios kinodun. V'lo tomar, Dayo is only hacha. Here in the case of Hezger Miriam, Mishum Kvodo Shel Moshe. Moshe was mispal on Miriam on behalf of his sister Miriam, that she shouldn't have the heavy tzaras, and she shouldn't therefore require Hezger. Avol bi'alma, in other occasions that we dash the Kal Vachomer, is low. We're not going to apply the din of Dayo. Kamash Malon, no. That this Dayo applies to all drashos of Kal Vachomer. So again, just to make a little bit of a summary, the Gemara is assuming that everybody agrees to the principle of Dayo. The question only is, are there situations in which the Kal Vachomer will operate and be valid even without Dayo? That's the machlokas Rabbi Tarfon and the Rabbanan, but they both agree to the principle of Dayo. I'm going to prove to you from another Tana, third Tana, that he rejects Dayo entirely. Even in a case where applying Dayo would only limit the Kal Vachomer, restrict it, but the Kal Vachomer would still be valid. Even in such a case, we're not going to apply Dayo. So that means we're setting up three shitos. We're about to learn a Tana who has one extreme shita. We have the Rabbanan have the other extreme shita, and we have the middle of the road shita of Rabbi Tarfon. And the extreme shita, the Chacham of Rabbi Tarfon, would argue that we're going to apply Dayo across the board. Even in a case where you could salvage something from the Kal Vachomer. And on the other extreme, we're going to now learn about a Tana who holds that you can rely on the Kal Vachomer, even in a case where despite the Dayo, the Kal Vachomer would still be substantive, and we're not going to apply Dayo at all. Okay, a few words about Tumas Zav. Yotza migufo ziva. If it's pamachas, tovel v'utome atshkiyas acham. Shtei re'ios, olav lispar shivas nikim, lilo ziva, v'tovel v'nitar. All this is recorded in the Torah in Vayikra Tesvav, ish kiyeh zov mibsaro, sovo, tamehu, Bezos tiatum also bezovo, etc., etc. Isanya, we learned in a brisa, Keri bezov minal. How do we know that the unique dimensions of Tuma that apply to a Zav as opposed to a Bal Keri will apply when the Zav has a Tipas Keri? Because normally, a Tipas Keri only requires Tumas Yom Echad. One second. Okay. So Keri bezav minayin. Now the unique tuma of zav is maga and masa, and we want to know if a zav sees a tip of Keri, do we have the same dinim of tumas magu masa? Vidinim. We're going to derive it from a kal v'chomer. Uma tohar. Okay, now we're talking about rok of a tahar, and it came from a tahar. Nevertheless, tameh bitame. In other words, the rok of a zav, the Torah says, "Vayikra tesva v'chiyah rok hazav b'tahar," and the Chachamim darshan in Masechet Nida Nun Hey Amid Beis l'Rabos says Masha b'yad atar. So, for example, if the zav salivates into something that's tar and is being held by the hands of a tar, so now the tar is carrying rok of a zav, is nitba, but that's called tumas masa. And there was no maga, it was only masa. And it's like he carried the zav himself. Now, Keri is more chamur. Tameh bitar, in other words, even if it was yotzev and a tar, so Keri coming out of a tar is tameh, which we didn't see by rok. Is eno dinshi a tameh bitameh. How much more so is the Keri that comes out of a zav going to be tameh? V'kamaisile, the brisa seems to assume stam bein lemago bein lemasa, that we're going to derive here the tuma of Keri in a case of zav for both mago and masa. V'amai, how can you derive that the Keri that comes out of a zav, otherwise known as shifas zera, that comes out of a zav, is metame even b'masa? Nema, why don't we say dahani kal v'chomer lemaga? Maybe the kal v'chomer is only going to teach me the din of tumas maga in the case of Keri ayotz min hazav. Ahani dayo lafuki masa, and now we're going to apply masa to restrict the kal v'chomer. And Dayo is going to tell me that there's no tumas masa in Keri shel zav, because shifas zera of an adam tar, which is the basis for the limud of this kal v'chomer, is not mitami b'masa. It's only mitami b'maga. Now, in this case, Dayo does not completely undermine the kal v'chomer, because we're still left with the kal v'chomer even after Dayo to teach me that Keri of zav is mitami b'maga. We're just going to exclude masa as a result of Dayo. So we see that there's a Tana who, even in the case where by applying Dayo we don't completely null and void the kal v'chomer, we still are not going to apply Dayo, and therefore going to derive tumas masa in Keri shel zav. So we see here a third Tana. V'chitem, and if you'll say lemaga lo itztrich kal v'chomer. If you're talking about maga, I don't even need the kal v'chomer. In other words, that keri shel zav is metami b'maga. I don't need a kal v'chomer for that. To logora, the keri shel zav is not worse than gavratar, than keri coming out of a gavratar, which is metami b'maga. So therefore, the Tana does not apply dayavom and adilius kinada because it would be oker the entire kavachomer. Because the entire thrust of the kavachomer is to establish maga in keri shel zav. Itzrich. So I need to learn the halacha, this din, through a kavachomer. Why? I would have thought that with regard to keri of atar, mikra laila ksiv, misha kirio gorem lo. Why is he mitame b'mago? It's because his keri was gorem lo tuma. Yotza zeh, in the case of zav, she'ein kirio gorem lo tuma elo dover acher gorem lo, which means yitzias haziva is gorem his tuma. Therefore, the keri of a zav would not even be tame, even b'toras maga. Kamash malon. Therefore, I need the kal v'chomer to establish that tipas keri hayotzis min hazav is metames bein b'magu bein b'masa. Now, if we would apply dayo, then we should have said that dayo limits the kal v'chomer to tumas maga and blocks it from being applicable to tumas masa. So we see that this Tana does not accept dayo. The Gemara answers no. Midi v'lo davar acher ksiv. The pasuk that we use to be mamayit, that someone who's tamei, even without kirio, which means azav, elo tumas maga b'keri, means that since the mute is not explicit in the language of the pasuk, therefore the din of tumas maga, as far as the keri shel zav, is like any din of tumas keri, and we would not derive it from a kal v'chomer. So now if we're going to apply dayo, and we're going to derive from dayo that tumas keri of zav only applies to tumas maga, not to tumas masa, then it comes out that dayo is completely oker the kal v'chomer. And that's why we don't darshan dayo. We don't apply dayo. And this is really the shita Rabbi Tarfon. Now the Gemara wants to analyze this halach in the brayso that shichvas zera shel zav is metame in both mago and masa. Uman tana d'shomi le'diyom shichvas zera shel zav metame not only b'mago but even b'masa. Lo Rabbi Eliezer, lo Rabbi Yeshua. It's neither of these two tanoim. Tisnan we learned in the Mishnah. Shichvas zera shel zav. I don't know if this is a Mishnah or a Brayso. I don't know. In any event, shichvas zera shel zav mitami b'mago ve'eno mitami b'masa de Rebbe Eliezer. So according to Rabbi Eliezer, shichvas zera shel zav is not mitami b'mago. I'm sorry, it's not mitami b'masa. Rabbi Yeshua omer af mitami b'masa. Lefishi efshar v'lo tzich ziva. That whenever shichvas zera comes out of the organ of a zav, then what's going to come with it is tzich shirayim shel ziva, shel zov. So therefore, the tipa shichvas zera is going to be metame exactly like a tipa zov, because they're mixed together. Now, this is a reflection of the shita Rabbi Eliezer. I'm sorry. Rabbi Eliezer was the one who said what? Shichva zer shel zav is only mitame b'masa, but not b'mag. I'm sorry. According to Rabbi Eliezer, Shichva zer shel zav is mitame b'maga, but not b'masa. Oh, I got it right. So therefore, this brisa could not reflect the sheet of Rabbi Eliezer, because here we're holding that Shichva zer shel zav is mitame even b'masa. Now, what about Rabbi Yeshua's shita? Maybe this brisa reflects Rabbi Yeshua. I can't look home Rabbi Yeshua Hasan Elashi Efshav Lotzich Tuchei Ziva. When Rabbi Yeshua said that Shichva Zer Shel Zav is Metama B'Masa, that's because there was Tuchei Ziva, not because of the Shichva Zera. If let's say you could have Shichva Zera without Tipas Ziva, lo, Rabbi Yeshua would say you're not Tomeh. In other words, the Metame here is not the carry. What's Metame is the Zov. When the carry comes out, we know that there's Zov with it. So it comes out that this brisa is not to be attributed neither to Rabbi Eliezer nor to Rabbi Yeshua. The Gemara concludes, Ela Hai Tanahu. But rather, it's the Tana that we're going to learn now in a Mishnah in Keilu.